Hi, guys. This is Shannon of Two Wise Girls podcast. I am unemployed and have more free time, so I wanted to do some more random reviews like this. And so this video is about the Sherlock and Co. podcast, like audio drama. There's no like visuals to it. It's all just like voice actors. And I wanted to talk about it because it has an autistic um Sherlock. And so I searched it up on YouTube and I didn't see any like reviews or anything of it. And so I thought it might be fun to do that, and if anyone would be interested in what somebody who's autistic would think about about a Sherlock adaptation that actually made him canonically not asexual, although he could be that too, autistic. But I especially wanted to talk about it because it's this very interesting sort of adaptation that I'm not sure that I've really seen before, which is that it's an adaptation of an adaptation, which is I'm not I'm sure there's like other things out there that I'm not thinking of right now where people did that, but I honestly can't remember of seeing something kind of quite like this. And so I say it's an adaptation of an adaptation because this audio drama is very obviously more inspired by the BBC Sherlock adaptation from 2010 than really even like the original stories. And it's like an interesting thing. Um, so I wanted to give a little a little background, I guess, of like how I found out about this adaptation even existing. Um, so I've always liked Sherlock Holmes stories because I like any like mysteries that make you think. Um, and like I said, I'm asexual and I'm also autistic, and I feel like Sherlock is both of those things. And so, um, the way that this kind of went for me was I uh I was I read BBC Sherlock fan fiction all the time. I don't know if everyone does this, probably not, but for me, reading fan fiction is like a therapeutic exercise. It has ever since I was like 12 when I started reading it. And I kind of go through different fandoms kind of are like for different things that I go through in my life. And so I always go back to BBC Sherlock fan fiction. I've had a giant list on my phone actually. You know what? This all these are BBC Sherlock fan fiction stories that I've had saved on my phone since I think I started doing that in like 2013. Um yeah. Like I made an account on my account name on AO3 is still BBC Sherlock like inspired because I got watching season 2 in in like 2012 I think was what got me to make a new account on AO3 when it was still a newer website and everything. But anyway, I've always read fanfic about it, especially asexual fanfic about it, because Sherlock and John are such a good depiction, and there's a lot of really good authors out there that have been able to show like what asexual relationships are like, what autistic people are really like, um, in like a character that feels like it should be like Stephen Moffat. Honestly, Stephen Moffat's a misogynist. I This is not like a new thing to say, but he is definitely somebody who sees like these characters that he idolized as a kid, like the Doctor and Sherlock, as like these amazing, cool, tough guys. And so to him, the idea of Sherlock being asexual or autistic was like an insult to him because he's a misogynist who's also ableist. And so he thinks that like if you're asexual, that means that he doesn't like get the girl and he doesn't get to be the cool guy. Like, he wants to self insert onto these characters. And he was never willing to, like, so much of the characterization of Sherlock in the BBC adaptation. Like, Benedict Cumberbatch did a lot, which is why I, like, still have, like, positive feelings for him, even though I also think he's in denial about the fact that he is also probably an autistic person. Like, you can't be sure, but every role he's basically playing somebody like that, and he gets mad that people think that his characters always are. um he could not be, but it makes me think that he might be, and he might be, like, trying not to think about it, like a lot of us do. But anyway, the BBC Sherlock adaptation was very lacking in those things, and but it's still there for fans to use. And so I've been reading BBC Sherlock fanfic for the long time. And like a year ago, I maybe not even a year ago, it was probably less than that, I started seeing fanfic for this podcast in the tags that I use when I look for autistic and asexual BBC Sherlock stories. Um, and I was like, oh, and I read fanfic probably for like 6 months of this podcast, just like reading and not knowing who the new characters that were in these stories were, or like the episodes they were really talking about, before I finally, a little bit ago, like a couple weeks ago, finally went back and listened to the whole show in a matter of like 2 weeks. um, but the thing with this show, like I was trying to say, an adaptation of an adaptation, the um, actors, like, who play John and Sherlock, the voice actors, they sound exactly like BBC Sherlock.
Who is that?
The creeping man.
They sound exactly like Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch, and it is a little bit freaky. Um, Sometimes, like when I listened to the new episodes, I closed my eyes, and I just, like, it's so easy to imagine the scenes on the show with the actors, with them, like, acting these stories out instead of the ones that we got, because of how they're very obviously trying to sound like them. And it definitely, like, paves its own path by making different choices than the BBC Sherlock adaptation did, but it also feels like it's a reaction to that show, like the reaction that people were disappointed with some aspects of that show. And so on this one, they're making different choices in order to have it be like, it literally feels like I'm listening to an AU fan fiction. And I mean that in a really good way, because I clearly love fan fiction, but it really feels like I'm listening to an audio drama that is an AU fan fiction of a TV show that is also an adaptation of the original material. And it makes me wonder about, like, what other people could do with this sort of thing. Like, could people make, like, an audio drama of, like, a, like Stranger Things just ended? Could people make an audio drama of Stranger Things, but, like, redo it at a certain point and do a storyline, like the story the way that they would want, instead of what ended up happening because people didn't like the ending of the show? Um, Maybe they can do copyright for this because Sherlock Holmes is, as a story, is so old, but it generally is interesting to think of the, like, creative opportunities, I guess, of this sort of thing. Um, because, yeah, like, the main differences that I thought was creative of how they adapted it is that the main big difference is that Mrs. Hudson is a younger woman. She is not, so in the original Sherlock Holmes stories that are from the 1800s, something that was common at that time was for you, when men like Sherlock and John were living in their own house, that there was Mrs. Hudson who lived downstairs, who would, like, make all of their food and, like, clean up their house as, like, kind of like a job to help take care of them. That was something that was a lot more common at that time. And so that's one of the things that people usually have to figure out how to adapt, because that's not something that happens in the here and now. And so in BBC Sherlock, Mrs. Hudson, I love the character of Mrs. Hudson. Actually, the actress for her died a couple years ago, and it made me sad that she died. But um, that version of Mrs. Hudson is still like an old lady, like she was in the original story. But she is like the landlord of 221B or 221 Baker Street, which is why she lives downstairs. And instead of it being like it's part of like her duties of being like this like person that takes care of them, because that's no longer socially a thing. Instead, we have her like coming upstairs and like offering them food and asking them if they want help like keeping the apartment clean sometimes, as like a joke. And she still like has a close relationship with Sherlock and knows Sherlock from before he knew John. But that's like how that adaptation did it. And this version, they have Mariana, and Metazura is her last name. She's Spanish, like from Spain, and her character. And instead of her being like the downstairs neighbor, she is instead working for the landlords who own Baker Street, 221 Baker Street. And so she's going in, and she's telling and she's like showing Sherlock and John in the first episode the apartment that they end up moving into, which of course 221B. And there's 221A downstairs that she's also trying, that her job is to try to rent it out, but that one is too small for them because it only has one bedroom. And so in this version of the show, um the way that they have her be called Mrs. Hudson, which is one of my favorite little jokes, is that Sherlock starts calling her Mrs. Hudson because the landlords for their building is called Hudson's, as like the name of their business. And so he starts calling her Mrs. Hudson because she works for them. And at the end of the first episode, um, she tells him that she's not going to be the building manager anymore, but then but sees that they have like this detective thing that they're doing where they're trying to make money getting these cases. Um, and so she offers, as having a history in accounting and like running a business, that she could run their business for them, like do like the spreadsheets and the money and the technical stuff, and take phone calls and like check their emails and things like that, to help organize it. And they say yes, um, and she ends up moving into 221A downstairs because in the context of the show, they got somebody offered them a lot of money to solve the case that they were working on, and so they can pay her rent for the next year along with theirs, and so she starts working for them. The other change that I think is fun is that Lestrade, who is usually a man, in this version she's a woman. Her name's Gwen. She's not in it as much as in BBC Sherlock. She is somebody that definitely knows Sherlock for many years. The episode that came out yesterday, that I listened to all parts of it because I'm on their Patreon, they reference throughout that mystery. There's a character in there that is Lestrade's niece, named Lily, and she knows who Mycroft is, who is Sherlock's brother, because she's known him for so long. And because Lestrade, or Gwen, has known him for so long. She doesn't really show up very often. Um, there is a fun dynamic where John is always afraid of Gwen because she is like, it shows like how she is like the person in charge. She's like the commissioner for all of the Met instead of being like a somebody that isn't as high up as Lestrade is on BBC Sherlock. But that's basically the main changes. There are also changes within every mystery, of course. Um, but that is like the main changes for how they like set up the story. And um, there are a lot of very good positives with the show. I really enjoy it. Like I said, I'm on their Patreon. Um, they do a really good job of making John Watson a full character, really. Like, they introduced his mother pretty early on, who was never on the BBC Sherlock show. Um, they introduced him having an ex-girlfriend. They talk more. There's a dynamic in the show where he was in the British military and then decided to join and try to help Ukraine and got kicked out of the military because of that. And the main like creative thing with John that I think is really fun with like how they're creatively like making this show is that John is somebody who has like, you know, those little lavalier mics that people use a lot in TikTok videos where they're like holding them and talking like this in them. So John basically has one of those because he wanted to do a podcast about veterans returning from war. And but instead he ends up doing a podcast about his investigations with Sherlock. And it's a very like kind of the fourth wall doesn't really exist in the show because the audience that they do like shout outs in every episode. They reference the fact that it's a podcast. They talk about how they're trying to record for the podcast. John will like try to get Sherlock to explain certain things or do certain things to make like the content better, which is something that I honestly don't like. But that's just like me and my that's like how I feel about consent. Like I don't like being reminded that somebody is like prioritizing making good content over like what is supposed to be two people solving like a murder or like a serious crime. And so I honestly wish that they would stop having him do that kind of stuff because it makes me not like John. It makes me feel like he's um, exploiting Sherlock a little, but that's not something that you're supposed to think when you're listening to the show at all. I'm just very big on consent, and so that's how I see it. Um, but yeah, it's John has a whole story with Mary that goes on for a long time. The thing I was and the one critique I have that I'm honestly curious and I'm kind of hoping that other autistic people who have listened to this show and still do could like give me feedback on this because I'm honestly interested to see what people think. Um, I I feel weird sometimes about the autistic representation that they give on the show. I feel like the representation it's one of the things with giving representation to some sort of marginalized identity is that you have to actually look at what the actual identity is, you know, and not just like make the character keep going as if they don't have this identity anymore. Um, like one thing we usually talk about Greek mythology and not BBC Sherlock. We usually talk about Greek mythology and Percy Jackson on this channel. And so, like for example, um, Percy Jackson making Annabeth black. Um, that is, there are certain storylines like how they represent her. They don't have her arguing and not getting along with Tyson in season 2, which to me felt like a representation of her being black, that they didn't want to put her in the line of fire like that and have like people be mad at her while they're watching the season. And her character being black would um, it's just a different way that they would interpret being afraid of somebody because of their trauma. Black people are used to having to like tamper down their emotions to make everybody else comfortable. That's a key part of the violence of like racism and white supremacy is groups like black people particularly have to do that because if they speak up about how they feel, they're seen as the aggressor a lot of the time. And so that's an example of how you change kind of a storyline to make it make sense so that the identity that you give the character isn't doesn't just feel like you made the same character but you just like slapped a marginalized identity on top of it to make it seem better. And so when I look at Sherlock and Co's Sherlock being autistic representation, I sometimes one of the things that I have a hard time about it with is that in the old stories, Sherlock was the one that was like the problem. Like he he's like not nice to strangers. He doesn't see the point in being nice to people. He gets very aggravated with people because he's very intelligent and doesn't see how they don't see these things that to him are very obvious. He doesn't understand social niceties, and he keeps like their living room a little bit messy. And people don't understand why. He does a lot of like, he gets like excited by the prospect of a difficult case, even when it's like a murder, which throws people off when they think that he's excited about a dead body or something, but it's purely about like the challenge of being able to like solve this challenge and figure something out that nobody else can, and like and things like that. But people don't understand that. But in the old stories, he is the one that kind of hurts John's feelings sometimes, or like upsets people because they don't understand what he's trying to say a lot of the time. The issue I have with that is that when you make him an autistic character, um if you have the a lot of like the times when John and Sherlock have conflict, if you make it that idea that like Sherlock is yelling at John about things, or he's not telling him things, or he's like keeping secrets from him or whatever, um if you keep going with that but you don't like expand his autistic side, or like him being on a fully autistic person, it kind of comes off like John is mad at him for being autistic sometimes. And that's like a weird thing as an autistic person to listen to, because I know other autistic people are definitely listening to this version of the podcast because we finally got representation. And most of it is good, but I will say that sometimes it is hard how the TV show about how the audio drama is giving all of this characterization and in-depth story for John, and how you're supposed to think that you're supposed to be on John's side when he gets upset at Sherlock. And most of the time I'm not, because it feel when I listen to it I feel like John is being too hard on him. Um or like he's just not being patient enough with him, or like considering like who Sherlock actually is, like being an autistic person. And I know that this is like an audio drama, and that it's likely, I don't know if the people involved in the show are autistic. It's likely that they may not be. But it does make me wish they had sensitivity readers if they were not, or if they just like thought about these things more, because they do mention things like they mention him getting overstimulated. They mention him using like ear defenders, which are headphones you wear to like block out noise so you don't get overstimulated. There's a entire episode earlier on where Sherlock is really fatigued from not sleeping and feeling not happy about a case that ended in a way that he didn't like. And it's literally part of the plot of the episode that he's really tired, and that they need to like take breaks and not do too much while solving this case because he's exhausted and isn't able to like focus super hard the way that he usually does. And so there are times where things like that come up, but it's just not as much as John. And so I understand that the character of Sherlock is usually the one that has a lot of like mysteries. Like he doesn't tell people when his birthday is, for example. He doesn't really tell people about a lot of other things. And it does feed into the storyline that happens with, particularly on BBC Sherlock, with Moriarty, which is just now on the show starting to happen. I'm glad that they built up Moriarty for a while before they went into it. BBC Sherlock definitely went into that story way too fast and got rid of him way too soon, which is why they kept trying to bring him back in really weird ways that never fully like completely made sense. I know that it's part of the story of Sherlock that the whole thing with Moriarty, you're spending multiple years listening to multiple years of content. It's hard to hear how you know all these things about John, but you don't know anything about Sherlock. Um, you don't know like, and the thing that I think is frustrating for me when I listen to this audio drama is that there are times when they could, but they just don't. Like, for instance, I forget the name of the episode, but there's an episode where they are low on money, and so Sherlock leaves and says he'll get a case that is by somebody that has a lot of money, so they don't have to worry about that anymore. And he comes back, and they have a case at like a very prestigious, um like very private all boys school that like does isn't even on like a map on Google Maps because it's for like the elites of the elites. And when they are at that school, one of the people that they name off that is an old student is James Moriarty. But when he comes back and he's telling Mariana and John about the case, he's way more nervous than he usually is, and they comment on it, and we as the audience know that he's more nervous because he got the case from Mycroft and he doesn't want to mess it up because he got it from his brother. And he kind of starts saying that and then stops, but like it's very clear when you're listening to that mystery that this version of Sherlock definitely went to a school like this. And so there are times when they could have gone into that, but they don't, and um it kind of comes off to me sometimes as like the people involved in the show don't want to go too much into Sherlock's state of mind. Maybe because they're saving it for now when they go into Moriarty. That's like the optimistic side of me saying that. But it also kind of feels like they don't want to go too far into Sherlock's perspective because they don't think that they can write his perspective well enough. And so they instead kind of keep him like this enigma mystery, so, and instead have everything be from John's perspective because they feel more secure about being able to write from his perspective than someone like Sherlock. And that's fine, but that also means that if you're somebody like me who identifies way more with Sherlock, you kind of feel like you're always on the outside of everything. Even the ending of the Six Napoleons, these episode they just put out, I was sad when I got to the very end and there wasn't like an additional thing from Sherlock at the end of it. Um, because I more want to know where he is emotionally at than the other characters. And so it's a weird dynamic where Mariana and John are really great friends. It's really fun to listen to all three of them. The investigations are really well done. The audio is really interesting. It's always from the perspective of John's lavalier mic, so it just makes how you're listening to it entertaining in and of itself. Um, and it's a really well done show, and I really enjoy it. And I'm going to continue listening to it every time they put out new episodes and everything. Um, but it is one of those things that I'm not sure that people who aren't disabled or aren't autistic would realize that sometimes it comes off like John is mad at him because he's coming up with autistic traits that he doesn't like. And you like, and I just like wish the show would like let Sherlock actually be like a full character instead of the more like enigma that he is. Like, if you introduce the idea that Sherlock saves emails and stuff he gets from people that watch the podcast that are autistic too, that see themselves represented in him, Sherlock as an autistic person would want to talk to those people on an episode. Because autistic people love talking to other autistic people. And so it's just like that simple of like he wouldn't be so much of an enigma all the time if he was getting feedback that some of the audience really like identified with him and wanted to hear more from him because they feel attached to him as a character. It's like stuff that is like the stuff that is that easy. And I am kind of curious to see if there's anyone out there that has listened to this audio drama and has felt any of these sort of things, or if I'm thinking about this too much. Um, but either way, I do recommend listening to it. It's a fascinating idea. It makes me wish that Mandy and I one day could do an audio drama like this that is like, just the idea of like a podcast form of characters that you wouldn't consider having a podcast before. Um, and so if you liked this video, please let me know. Um, there's other books and stuff that I have that I'm planning on reading while I'm unemployed for however long this lasts. The last time I was unemployed, I created this YouTube channel with Mandy because I was unemployed and I was unemployed for basically an entire year. So we'll see how long this goes and how many books I read on here because I'm way too bored.